And now from Washington, the Inside Scoop. All the news the government does not want you to hear. Now, here's your host on the Inside Scoop, Mark Levine.
To the Inside Scoop, many people have questioned why we are in Iraq. The original rationales for the war, things like weapons of mass destruction or connections to Al-Qaeda, we know are completely false. And the idea that we're in Iraq to promote democracy seems a stretch given the incipient civil war. So why are we in Iraq? Well, many activists, including those that are protesting the war just this weekend in Washington, D.C., say it's all about oil. But is that just a catchphrase? It's all about oil, or is it really about oil? My guest today is Antonia Juhasz, and she's the author of The Bush Agenda, Invading the World One Economy at a Time. And she has studied specifically what American oil companies are doing to profit from this Iraqi war. Antonia, welcome to the Inside Scoop.
Thanks for having me.
So before we get to the current state of affairs, let's go into the past and try to understand why we may have invaded in the first place. In the years of Saddam Hussein being in power, what was the relationship between American oil companies and profits and the Iraqi regime?
Sure, and this is a topic that I go into in detail in the book, so I'll try and encapsulate what I say here. But basically, there's two stages of the U.S. Oil relationship and economic relationship with Saddam Hussein. And I think it's important for listeners to know that it was Ronald Reagan who opened up the economic relationship between the United States and Saddam Hussein.
We didn't have one before then?
No, actually Saddam had canceled relations with the United States because of the U.S. support for Israel in 1973.
Okay.
And Ronald Reagan opened up U.S. ties with Saddam Hussein in 1984.
So that was before the Iran-Iraq war or kind of in the middle of it?
After the Iran-Iraq war had started. Okay. So the motivation, initially, there was two elements of motivation. One was that with the revolution in Iran in 1979, the United States lost one of its most valuable allies in the Middle East, Iran. Sure. And it was a valuable ally for many reasons. One very key one was its oil. It
Sure.
has the world's third largest reserves of oil.
Iran does.
Iran does.
Now, after the Khomeini regime came to power in 79, they stopped selling us oil as well?
They first nationalized their oil system, more importantly, kicked out the U.S. and British companies that were there, that had controlled the oil up until that point.
Did they sell it on the open market? Could we get their oil through the open market? Or so in other words, Americans could get Iranian oil, but American oil companies couldn't get the profits.
That's right, exactly.
Okay, so we're coming into 1984, and we have Iran selling oil on the open market and Iraq selling oil on the open market, but our U.S. oil companies aren't getting their share of profits.
Well, first what's happening is, so with the revolution, the United States and U.S. oil companies lose their access to Iran. They're on the market for a new Iran. So what better place to look than Iran's neighbor, Iraq, that has the second largest oil reserves in the world? So attention gets turned to Iraq, and Ronald Reagan opens up ties with Saddam Hussein, supports Saddam Hussein in the war against Iran.
This is when Don Rumsfeld comes over and we see those pictures of him shaking hands with Saddam Hussein.
That's right, that's right. And what was happening was that U.S. business was also very, very eager to get into Iraq because Iraq had potential to be an incredibly wealthy society. And U.S. companies like Halliburton and Bechtel and Lockheed Martin all went into Iraq. The Bechtel Corporation, for example, managed a petrochemical complex for Saddam Hussein.
And this is all in the mid-'80s while Iraq is fighting a war with Iran.
That's right.
An extremely deadly war. About 1 million people died in the Iran-Iraq war. People don't realize how damaging this war was to all sides. But we were on Iraq's side, and then later on with the Iran-Contra affair, we're on Iran's side as well. Was this sort of, did both sides know we were on the other country's side?
No, there was an attempt to play both sides of the fence, to have Iran believe that we were supporting Iran, Iraq believe that we were supporting Iraq. We were sort of supporting Iran. We were very much supporting Iraq.
Now, one thing that's interests me, because there's a lot of talk about why we have to topple Saddam, and people mention his brutal gassing of so many Kurdish Iraqis with chemical weapons in the late 80s. How much were we supporting Iraq during that time?
Oh, fully and fundamentally, we supported. So Lockheed Martin sold Saddam helicopters. Bechtel managed, again, a petrochemical complex that made the precursor to mustard gas that was then used on the Kurds.
So Bechtel made the gas that killed the Kurds.
Managed the complex.
Managed
that made
the complex.
The gas.
All right,
right. Let's
enough.
not get ourselves
No. Okay,
Yeah.
so the complex was in Iraq producing this gas, and
managed by
Bechtel was managing it.
We sold Saddam computers. We gave him intelligence. We sold him arms. We loaned him money, billions of dollars with which he could then turn around and buy our products. We completely supported this dictator. Now, there was one really key objective. That was to gain access to Iraq's oil. Now, what Saddam Hussein did do was sign marketing contracts with U.S. oil companies. Exxon, Chevron are the two leaders. They were able to pick up Iraq's oil on the border and then ship it out and essentially sell it to themselves. Now,
to themselves, meaning the American oil companies, Exxon.
That's right. So
Chevron.
It's important to understand that these are vertically integrated companies. So they do within one company exploration, production, refining, marketing, and sales.
They take it out of the ground and all the way to the consumer.
That's right. So if they're marketing oil, they're not really sort of shipping it out into the global market. They're selling it to themselves to then sell at their own stations.
What were the profits at these times? Well, I mean, how much money are we talking about? Billions of dollars, I assume?
Trillions of dollars.
Trillions of dollars.
Yeah, this is a lot of oil we're talking about.
All right, not even billions, but trillions of dollars.
Worth a lot of
1,000 billion.
Yes, 1,000 billion. And and easily. And this is good, but not what the companies wanted.
It certainly makes Exxon very profitable.
It helps with Exxon.
You say it wasn't what they wanted. In the 80s, weren't they happy?
They weren't happy in the 80s. They
even
weren't
in the
even
80s.
happy in the early 90s.
Well, so even prior to the sanctions, prior to the Persian Gulf War, that wasn't enough.
It wasn't enough because what they wanted was access to Iraq's oil under the ground. So Saddam Hussein had a nationalized oil system.
Isn't it all under the ground? No, seriously, I'm not sure what you mean by under the ground. How is that different from what they were using already?
So the big question in oil is who owns the reserves. So prior to the 1970s, the oil companies owned the reserves everywhere. They
owned Iraqi's national reserves.
Yeah, in Iraq
Americans
it happened
too?
more like 1961. Yeah.
Okay.
The British predominated, is that a word?
Yes, it is a word, actually.
In Iraq, and the French.
So they owned all the oil under the ground.
They owned the oil under the ground, that's right.
Because Iraqi signed agreements to give them all the oil under the ground.
Well, Iraq, of course, didn't exist as a country.
Iraq was a British creation to begin with.
Right.
So
the
created a government
took the oil
to let them give their oil. Okay.
That's right. Same thing in Iran. Same thing all over the world.
But these agreements, I assume, had a lifespan, right? They would end every 5-10 years.
No. Some had 40-year lifespans. Some had 70-year lifespans.
So did Saddam Hussein just rescind those agreements and say, "Hey, this is our oil"?
It actually started earlier in Iraq. It started with Qasim, who was a very popular leader in Iraq, who earlier in the 60s actually led a movement that then took off around the world to form something called the Organization for Petroleum Exporting Countries.
I've heard that. OPEC.
Yes. So he passed a law to nationalize Iraq's oil systems. And that
to grab
is something,
it for Iraq instead of for American oil companies.
And not even to grab it. So who's going to own the oil under the ground? And who's going to get to decide the terms on which it's sold and at what price? And so oil-rich countries around the world made a decision that instead of the oil companies owning the oil, controlling supply, controlling price, and then giving them back a few dollars, that the oil countries would
own the oil themselves. Okay, so let's go back to the 1980s. So we're in the 1980s. Yeah. We're supporting both Iran and Iraq, maybe a little bit more Iraq, secretly Iran through Iran-Contra. The oil companies are making literally $1 trillion off this, and you said they wanted more.
Yes.
So I'm just trying to figure out what more do they want?
They want to own the oil under the ground.
So instead of making a deal for Iraq to buy the oil from them, they want to actually own it, possess it.
Yeah, they don't want to just market it.
They don't want to buy it and sell it. They want to own it from the beginning.
There's two reasons for this. So oil companies, their stock value is most determined by how much oil they have control of.
No, I understand why they want it.
Yeah.
What did they do in the late 1980s? Because between 1988 and the Persian Gulf War, I don't remember the oil companies going in and doing anything. But you can remind us. What was it?
Well, we had under Ronald Reagan and then under Bush Sr., we had an entire phalanx of U.S. People working for the United States government, whose job it was to go lobby Saddam Hussein on behalf of U.S. corporations, thus the photograph of Donald Rumsfeld and Saddam Hussein. George Shultz, another key person in this story, Secretary of State under Ronald Reagan, but before that, 8 years as the president of the Bechtel Corporation, now on the board of directors of the Bechtel Corporation, essentially lobbying for the Bechtel Corporation in Iraq.
Did Iraq give them better deals?
Iraq certainly opened up its country very well to U.S. companies, but not enough in their interests, and not to the extent that the Ronald Reagan or the Bush Sr. administration or the U.S. oil companies wanted.
Okay, next comes the Persian Gulf War, which takes Bush Sr. by surprise. His ambassador, April Glaspie, there's Kuwait may have gone too far. They had these pipes under the ground that may have gone under the border. And April Glaspie, our ambassador to Iraq, says to Saddam Hussein, your border dispute with Kuwait, that's not really any of our business. We kind of, I guess, thought he'd grab some border area, not thinking he would grab the whole country.
Yeah.
Which surprises President Bush Sr., and we decide to go to war to protect Kuwait. I would think the oil companies at that time, I don't know. Why would they support that war? It would hurt their contacts with Saddam Hussein.
No, because so there's quite a bit of dispute on the question of, did George Bush Sr. allow Saddam Hussein to go into Kuwait as a pretext for removing him from office? I am personally under the opinion that he did.
So in other words, by saying we have no problem with your border dispute with Kuwait, it wasn't then that Bush Sr. was surprised when he took the whole country. It wasn't just a boneheaded move. The idea is we wanted him to go into Kuwait so we could wipe out Saddam Hussein and get Kuwait to be very thankful to us and therefore control the oil in both countries.
I think he was taken aback by the extent to which Saddam Hussein went into Kuwait, the level of the military intervention. I don't think Bush was trying to sacrifice Kuwait in any way because the Kuwaitis are very close oil allies of ours.
So in other words, we thought they would do something over the border and then we would use that as an excuse to take out Saddam Hussein.
Exactly.
Now, okay, but then the Persian Gulf War comes, and many people are arguing, I know General Schwarzkopf was very much arguing, finish the job, go to Baghdad. They're all there, the so-called Republican Guard, they're in the streets, we can bomb them. The Shiites and the Kurds are uprising, and Colin Powell is against it, and George Bush, to many people's surprise, pulls back. Mm-hmm. Is there an oil connection there?
Yeah, so I think the easiest way to understand this is, what is the difference between the war of George Bush Sr. against Saddam Hussein and the war of George Bush Jr. against Saddam Hussein? George Bush Sr. was interested in unseating Saddam Hussein, the individual, an individual who had proven that he wasn't going to play ball to the extent that the United States wanted him to. And they wanted a new dictator.
A new Iraqi dictator who would certainly torture his people but would give us better oil deals.
Yeah, anyone really, as long as they will play ball. And they thought this would be easy. They thought that the U.S. invasion would lead to a coup. The
generals would take down Saddam Hussein. You made a mistake, Saddam. You invaded Kuwait. We're getting rid of you. And a new general will come in who'll be more American friendly.
No problem. Now,
why didn't that happen?
They didn't understand Iraq the way they thought they did. That seems to be their problem everywhere. It wasn't as simple as they thought it would be. And then some very important things happened in the intervening years. So one of the things that happened was that the Soviet Union,
right.
My brain's been in the Middle East too long.
That's okay.
The Soviet Union,
which was starting to fall apart at that time,
has collapsed
fully.
And the realization of that collapse starts to take hold in the 90s. So in the United States, there becomes to be a very in-depth debate about what it means to be the sole superpower, what we're going to do with that position. And a group of people emerge who have since been dubbed the neocons, who believe that what that means is that we need to be an imperial power of the likes of Rome, and they use the term themselves.
Are you talking about the Project for a New American Century, or even before that?
The Project for the New American Century. Okay. And it's not talking about just the Project for the New American Century. It's talking about 16 members of the Bush administration who participated in that project. Cheney, Wolfowitz, Rumsfeld, Richard Pearl, former U.S. Trade Representative Robert Zellick, U.S. Ambassador to Iraq Zalmay Khalilzad, the key men in the administration, except for George Bush himself. And they say themselves that what we have in the United States is a Pax Americana, which is a reference to the Pax Romana, a period of time.
We're so powerful that no one will challenge us, and therefore we're going to have this great peace under our benevolent reign.
Yes, they don't use the term.
With profit for oil companies and everyone else.
They never use the term benevolent. That's the liberal version, right? That's the liberal version.
Not so benevolent.
Yeah,
well,
benevolent.
Peace, you know.
Peace, whatever. So they rise to prominence, and their idea is that we're not just going to put different dictators into countries. We're going to go into countries. We're going to rewrite their economic and political infrastructure. We're going to lock in our access. So in fact, it doesn't matter who the random dictator is.
Because if you have a democracy where they're always going to be pro-U.S., then they'll just go and always have people who are pro-U.S.
And their laws have been fundamentally rewritten to lock in the access that the corporations want and that the administration wants.
Okay, we're going to take a break. When I get back, I want to explore the sanctions after the Persian Gulf War and then leading up to the current war. Yeah. And then, folks, stay tuned because we're going to get to the current Iraqi laws that are being written by our oil companies to assure them profits. If you want to pose a question on this topic, please, we encourage you to call in. The toll-free number is 888-488-MARK, 888-488-6275. We'll be right back with Antonia Juhasz right after this.
This is Mommy's bed. Me and Jenny were jumping on it. Mommy's gun fell on the floor. I was a cowboy. Bang, 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 bang. I said, Jenny, wake up, it's just pretend. But she wouldn't wake up. If you give me a fish.
If you give someone a fish,
you feed them for a day. Teach someone to fish.
You feed them for a lifetime.
Give me a fish, and you'll feed me for a day. Teach me to fish, and you'll feed me for a lifetime.
Through Volunteers of America, you can help change lives in your community.
Oh, hey, mister, you studied algebra in school and got a better job than I could. You take the last cut.
Oh, no, mister. Stuck in an entry-level job because you only learned basic math. I don't have a boss riding my butt like you do, so you take it so you can get back to your desk.
You know, I probably should, but maybe Miss AP Calculus with the $200 haircut in the big office upstairs would like a cup.
Oh, no, mister. What was your name again? Never mind, it doesn't matter. I'm too busy doing important things to care. I just came down for some sweet and start.
You know, if my limited math abilities weren't keeping me from getting a better job, I'd quit this afternoon.
I don't blame you. But thank goodness you're stuck here because we really need someone to make the coffee.
Line it up, baby. Come on. Line it up, baby. Come on. Line it up, baby. Come on.
From Washington, back to the Inside Scoop with Mark Levine.
Welcome back to the Inside Scoop. My guest is Antonia Juhasz. She is the author of The Bush Agenda, Invading the World One Economy at a Time. And we're talking about the role that oil has played up to and including the invasion of Iraq and even today. It's very interesting in going through this history. This is nothing new, the idea that we should invade Iraq and grab its oil. I mean, you're talking about stuff that dates back to the 60s even.
Oh,
and
sure.
So, but where we've gone to the Persian Gulf War. And after the Persian Gulf War, there are sanctions on Saddam Hussein that I thought we supported I think George Bush Sr. began those sanctions. Didn't he think it would harm American oil companies?
Well, the sanctions were initially put in place by Bush, thinking that, again, very quickly and easily there would be an unseating of Saddam Hussein. Clinton then came into office, and there is a very big difference between the Republicans and the Democrats, just broadly speaking, and then we can get specifics when we talk about the Bush administrations, in their direct relationship to oil companies. Clinton was definitely a corporatist. He was very interested in expanding free trade, and
he wanted American business to succeed. No question
he
about
wanted to spread access to American the largest U.S. multinational corporations abroad. I am an anti-corporate globalization activist. I can rally against Clinton as much as we want to, but that's not the topic of tonight's conversation.
But he was different from
The
Bush.
difference between Clinton and Bush was that Clinton, I really think, just sort of wanted Iraq something he didn't have to deal with. There were limited military strikes against Iraq that had devastating impacts on the people of Iraq. And the sanctions...
We were enforcing, there was a no-fly zone that we put in, and there were sanctions, and all of these were UN resolutions that our government supported, both Bush Sr. and Clinton. But I'm trying to figure out if what you're telling me is George Bush Sr. put it in thinking Saddam would be toppled quickly.
Right.
And then when Clinton came into power, that wasn't so much his goal as way to say, well, Saddam's a bad guy in the popular press, so we'll just keep the sanctions on.
Yeah.
It wasn't so much to topple Saddam Hussein as it was just sort of to keep him out of focus,
yes.
I guess.
And that's in no way to diminish the devastating and horrific impact of the sanctions on the Iraqi public and to let Clinton off for that. But just in terms of the motivations of the presidents, which is what we're talking about now, and the access of oil companies.
Well, why didn't the Iraqis overthrow Saddam Hussein to get rid of the sanctions?
It's a question you're going to have to ask the Iraqis. Now, we could go into this for a very long time, but it's the level of repression that was exercised
he just had
by Saddam
too
Hussein.
tight a hand on the reins of power.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we have the sanctions in, and American oil companies are at the end of the day doing worse than they did in the 80s.
Right.
Because now they have sanctions. At least before they were getting Iraqi oil they could buy, even if they didn't own it all under the ground. Now, if they buy it, it's on the black market, I guess.
No, U.S. companies are still getting marketing contracts, and that's through the Oil for Food program. So the Oil for Food program was established theoretically so that the people of Iraq could at least get some money for desperately needed basic services, and that Iraq's oil would be used to pay for it, oil for food. And U.S. companies, as well as other foreign companies, are the companies that profited. They marketed the oil and then let Saddam Hussein have some of the profit. So U.S. companies, particularly Chevron, was the lead U.S. company who was participating in the Oil for Food program and profiting off of it.
Now, as I recall, there were a few years in there where there were just sanctions before they did Oil for Food. I would bet the oil companies put a lot of pressure on the Clinton administration saying, hey, we need to get some profits out here, and that's why they began the program. I certainly wasn't for the Iraqi people.
Well, right. It also happened because there was tremendous global pressure in opposition to the sanctions, and they had to do something.
Did the oil go for food? Did it actually get to the people?
Some of it did. In no way was that a successful program. In no way was that any cure for the problem of sanctions.
Now, recently, under the Republican Congress, there was a lot of talk about the scandals of the Oil for Food program. They talked about Kofi Annan and his family, and they pointed out that Russia and France were evading the sanctions and selling on the black market. They weren't the only countries that were doing that, were they?
Well, the United States was, of course, one of the key members of the Oversight Committee of the Oil for Food program. So the United States was well aware of every scandal, every use of the contracts, and had oversight over the contracts. And the United States was as intent as every other member of the Security Council to get its companies to profit, and its companies did profit.
And that never came out when they did those hearings. They would blame it all on Kofi Annan.
That's right. But just... And there's a tremendous amount of sort of scandal in history there. But just to get to this, the differences between sort of Bush and Clinton, just one statistic that lays this all out very clearly. The oil and gas industry has always, and does to this day, consider the Republicans to be their party.
Sure.
The oil and gas industry has never given more than about 72% of all of its funding in any given electoral year to Democrats, even when the Democrats were in party. And in the 2000 election cycle, the oil and gas industry gave Bush Cheney 13 times more money, 13 times than the Gore ticket. So the other things that happened, so we have the sanctions. Towards the end of the 90s, but more importantly with the introduction of the first Bush administration, we have a very important phenomena that happens within the oil industry, and this is the mergers. Exxon merges with Mobil, Chevron merges with Texaco, Conoco merges with Phillips, and instead of having hundreds of oil companies, we have just a small handful of mega companies that are so big and so profitable that they put every other company to shame. So ExxonMobil, I think
they couldn't prevent some of these mergers through antitrust laws? That mostly.
No, they didn't. There was.
Some was under Clinton, some were under Bush.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
But significantly increased under Bush.
Under Bush. So, okay, so we have these companies in power.
Yeah.
And, of course, 2001 is around. Were there plans to invade Iraq before September 11th?
Yeah, so the one other important thing that happened during the sanctions regime is that towards the end of the sanctions regime, Saddam Hussein was eagerly looking, one, for money, but two, for countries within the Security Council that would take a stand against the sanctions. So he started signing oil contracts for oil under the ground with companies from China, Russia, France. These countries should ring a bell, and members of the Security Council.
I see.
He started signing contracts with them, and they would sign contracts, but they weren't ready to completely turn against the sanctions regime, and none of the contracts went into effect. Now we move into the first few weeks of the new Bush administration.
And that's when Paul O'Neill has written the book, The Price of Loyalty, where he's shown us those maps where they literally divided Iraq up into separate oil fields.
That's right. This was part of the Cheney Energy Task Force. Now, who are the members of the Cheney Energy Task Force?
It's secret. They won't tell us.
Well, we know some things because the Supreme Court forced some of the documents out. Exxon, Chevron, Conoco, Halliburton, Bechtel, these were the people who were sitting at the table.
And they are sitting with a map of Iraq, literally dividing it up. You get this, I get this,
they put out lists that are called, a list that's entitled Foreign Suitors to Iraqi Oil, that lists all of the foreign companies from all of the foreign countries that have their hands on Iraq's oil. Now, the handwriting is on the wall. Global public opinion is turning aggressively against the sanctions. If the sanctions are removed, while Saddam Hussein is still in power, all of those other companies from all of those other countries will get their hands on all of that oil, and the U.S. will be shut out.
I want to get to more. We also have to take a break, and we have a caller on the line as well. Kevin from Vienna will be right back with your call for Antonia Juhasz. First, we're going to take another break. Folks, if you want to join in the conversation, it's easy to do. Toll-free number is 888-488-MARK. We'll be right back after this.
Sweetheart, smoke outside now. You promised.
Okay, hon.
Sweetheart, smoke outside now. You promised.
What kind of man are you? I'm a father. Look here, my father was a father, and he smoked his brains out in the house.
Watch as he blows those smoke rings on my little red face.
You probably have asthma.
Asthma? Schmasma. I'm telling you, nothing's gonna happen to your kids. I swear.
Don't swear when you're lying. You know very well that thousands of kids get bronchitis, ear infections, and even pneumonia from their parents' cigarette smoke. And didn't you promise your little angels you'd smoke outside?
Hey, Daddy.
Those little devils are just so sweet.
Do the right thing.
Please, smoke outside.
Until you can stop, go out for your kids.
Take the pledge. Call 1-800-513-1157.
It is more than a trial by fire. It is a rite of passage, a challenge to join the elite. And if you succeed, if you can master your fear, outsmart your enemy, and never yield even to yourself, you will be changed forever. The few, the proud, the Marines.
From a commercial.
Back to the Inside Scoop with Mark Levine.
Welcome back to the Inside Scoop. We're discussing the war in Iraq and the role of oil in causing that war. My guest is Antonia Juhasz. She's the author of The Bush Agenda, Invading the World One Economy at a Time. Kevin from Vienna, welcome to the Inside Scoop.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I just wanted to make, I guess, one comment and one observation. One observation being, there's very little doubt that Iraq is an important nation because of its oil reserves. That's why it chose under Hussein to invade Kuwait. They did, in fact, want to accumulate as much oil wealth as possible. I unfortunately don't believe that this war was conducted purely because of the oil. I think it would be a convenient reason, a convenient thing for those who oppose the action to say that.
Well, Kevin, let me ask you, because we're going to get to how, in fact, the oil companies are profiting from the war today. We're definitely going to get to that. Why do you think we went to war in Iraq?
Well, I think you need to look at the overall rationale of why we are in that region. We are in Afghanistan because we were brought into Afghanistan because they brought the war to us.
Well, I'm talking about Iraq. Why are we in Iraq?
We are in Iraq because there was a definite linkage between Iraq and Al Qaeda.
Well, that's been disproven by the 9/11 Commission, by
President Bush.
President Bush has even admitted that there is no connection. President Bush has said there's no significant connection. Every single Senate and committee that's looked at it. I should tell you this, Al Qaeda is in Iraq now. That's true. But they weren't in Iraq at the time of Saddam Hussein. In fact, Saddam Hussein was very much an opponent of Osama bin Laden, very much tried to keep Al Qaeda out of Iraq. He was an enemy of Osama bin Laden. So
because Saddam Hussein did not have an Islamic government, which was very contrary to the interests of Al Qaeda in particular, the Taliban in particular, and Osama bin Laden. They were in no way allies or supportive of each other.
Well, they weren't, because there's a conflict in the Arab world between the secular dictators and the Islamic dictators, and there's always been that kind of conflict. And so there really was no connection. And again, you don't just have to take our word for it, Kevin. Even the president, after a lot of pushing, has admitted that there was no significant connection. There is now, but there certainly wasn't at the time of Saddam Hussein. Does that answer your question? I think I think Kevin's gone.
Okay.
But there are still people who believe these original rationales. I mean, weapons of mass destruction, people believe we thought it was there, believe there was a connection to Al Qaeda. Let's move on to the war and how oil companies have actually profited from it, because all this history is all well and good. We're dividing up Iraqi oil fields in 2001. And, of course, 9/11 happens. There was some discussion, correct me if I'm wrong, about where we should invade first. At least there were some people in the administration that actually thought, even though it was no question Osama bin Laden came from Afghanistan, that we should invade Iraq first. Is that right?
Oh, most certainly. And there's no controversy on this point. There's very clear documents, signed letters to President Clinton, signed by the key members of the Bush administration in 1998, calling for the toppling of Saddam Hussein. They then came into power, and immediately in the first meetings of the National Security Commission, of the key White House leadership, to discuss plans for an invasion of Iraq.
Right. Paul O'Neill, the Treasury Secretary, his book mentions that the meeting took place on January 30th, 2001, which is 10 days after Bush is in power.
That's right.
They're talking about the invasion of Iraq.
That's right.
After September 11th, and I thought, maybe this came from Richard Clark, I don't remember who it came from, I thought there were some in the administration that were pushing actually for an invasion of Iraq first. But then the president or others said, no, we have to go after Afghanistan first. They attacked us.
That's right. That's right. And just to get back on the oil. So beginning as early as 2002, there was a working group in the U.S. State Department focused on oil and energy in Iraq. And they began drafting what a post-invasion plan should look like for remaking Iraq's oil infrastructure. And that was to change it from a nationalized oil system to one that was open to private foreign corporations on the best terms possible.
Now, I know when Paul Wolfowitz came before, I think it was the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, I know it was a congressional committee, and was asked about the cost of the war, he said, it won't cost anything. The oil will pay for itself. So clearly we plan to take a lot of profits from the oil and use it, I guess, to help fund the war. Whatever happened with that idea?
Well, that was certainly part of the plan, but you have a bunch of different plans going on at once. So from the beginning, it was very clear that the United States had an agenda that included at least protecting Iraq's oil infrastructure. Of course, we all have the famous images of the invasion taking place and the Iraqi oil ministry being protected by U.S. troops while looting takes place all throughout the rest of the government and vital resources. But the planning, which started in the State Department, then moved very quickly into the planning on the ground after the occupation. And the first Bremer appointed, Paul Bremer was the head of the occupation government of Iraq, the Coalition Provisional Authority. The very first government of Iraq put in place by Paul Bremer, the head of it was Ayad Allawi, who was the first prime minister of Iraq, appointed by Bremer. Allawi, also a former CIA operative, very, very close relations to the United States government. He then introduces the State Department oil law, essentially the same plan.
Okay, so the first time we try to get an oil law through the Iraqi government, which is our government, we install it, is in the first few months after the invasion.
Right.
Through Allawi. Okay, so what does that law say, and was it passed?
So, no, Allawi introduces the law. Then the first time we really hear about it publicly...
Well, tell me what the law is before we talk about what happened to it.
So this
what would the law do?
Open up Iraq to private foreign corporate investment, open up the oil industry, take the nationalized oil system and essentially privatize its functions, and give control of all... So let's back up a minute. Iraq has 80 known oil fields. 80 fields where we know where the oil is, we know how much is there. Only about 17 have even begun to be developed. Iraq is literally like a giant pimple of oil that has yet to be plucked.
Gotcha.
The oil is right below the surface. It costs about $1 a barrel to produce it, and of course oil is selling at $54 a barrel right now.
Massive profits.
Massive profits. Now the Allawi law would say that all of those undeveloped fields should be immediately turned over to private foreign corporations.
Would they bid for it, or how would it all go to United States corp? As I recall, there was one time when the Bush administration said, well, France didn't help us, so they don't get any, and Russia didn't help us, so they don't get any. Would it all go to American companies?
I don't think we should get bogged down in the Allawi law because there's a lot to sort of follow its process to get where we are.
Okay, so they try this first law, and what happens with it?
It's introduced. Then we hear about it in Washington, D.C., when Allawi's finance minister comes to give a briefing and does a press conference at the National Press Club with the State Department, okay, hand in hand.
Gotcha.
And the finance minister says, we're working on this new oil law. It would be really great for U.S. corporations, and you should really, be proud of us because we're working on this.
Right.
Now, Abdel Mahdi is the individual who was the finance minister then, a strong supporter, adherent of the occupation and of the U.S. economic agenda in Iraq. He's now a deputy prime minister in Iraq. Then Mahdi moves the law forward. There is still a great deal of controversy over when should the law actually be presented to a parliament, because of course these still are not elected Iraqi governments.
These are appointed.
These are appointed.
Right.
So what the oil companies want is an elected Iraqi government to pass the law so that the law is legal, so that the contracts they sign are legal.
So they've got to get elections in place as soon as possible so that it justifies them grabbing the oil.
That's right. So they have legal contracts with which to hold on to the
Gotcha.
oil. So what happens is this a process in getting this law forward. We've got the Bush administration appoints a private company, Bearing Point, that has an individual who represents U.S. interests in the Iraqi oil ministry. He's there for no other reason than to push this new oil law. We have the Bush administration starting to say to the Iraqis, you have to pass this oil law. U.S. corporations starting to say publicly, we won't go into Iraq unless the new oil law is passed. We then have the Iraq Study Group report, of which the Bush administration has disagreed with quite a bit. It didn't disagree, however, at all with the recommendations on oil that the Iraq Study Group report made, which were that Iraq should privatize its oil system.
Okay, but what we've had 3 years, or 4 actually, going on 4, between, I guess it's more than 4 now, from the invasion of Iraq till today. And we've had some elections. Why hasn't this oil law gone into effect?
So now it has. Now it's about to. So we've had elections, but the al-Maliki government has been a very weak government, right? Remember, it wasn't the al-Maliki government at first. He's a replacement.
Right.
He's a replacement
and
prime minister.
And we didn't want him. He was al-Sadr's man.
No. Al-Maliki is in no way al-Sadr's man.
Well, al-Sadr turned to support al-Maliki to get him into power.
Yeah, no. Al-Maliki is a Shiite, and that's sort of the closest that he comes to al-Sadr. The al-Maliki government is not a dream child of the Bush administration, but it's
still
not doing
working
bad
with the Bush administration.
Yeah, quite closely and quite dependent on the occupation to maintain its power. And the al-Maliki government takes its time, and it's still working on the whether it's going to be able to get this law passed. So the Iraq Study Group report comes out, says Iraq needs to privatize its oil system. Immediately following the release of the report, President Bush, for the first time, publicly says the Iraqis need to pass the oil law. That's followed by U.S. Ambassador to Iraq, Zalmay Khalilzad, publicly saying the Iraqis need to pass the law. General Casey, the Iraqis need to pass the law. The Bush administration leaks news of the surge. Immediately following leaks of the surge, the al-Maliki government finally says this law is going to go before an oil committee.
Sounds like we want to get that law in before we withdraw troops, and they won't be under the pressure to get our law in.
Absolutely. So the al-Maliki government presents the oil law to an oil committee. It is now passed out of this oil committee. And what the law does, after it passes out of the oil committee, which it has to then go to the cabinet and then to the parliament. The Bush administration and U.S. oil companies are putting tremendous pressure to have this law passed.
What does the law do?
The law takes... It puts a name on Iraq's oil system in that it would be a nationalized oil system. But all of the functions of the government would be privatized using a model called production sharing agreements. What those do is give the oil companies that which they have wanted since before the war, ownership of Iraq's oil under the ground.
Now, would it be only American oil companies, or do some British share in it, or how about French or Russian or Chinese?
Any country could conceivably compete for the contracts. However, the presence of 150,000 troops adds some sway to the American position. In addition, it's U.S. oil companies and the British, BP and Shell, BP, Shell, Exxon, Chevron, and Conoco, and Marathon, that have been hovering around the edges, providing free services, providing free negotiations to the Iraqis, and also putting the pressure on. There's little doubt that these are the companies that would be most likely to get the contracts.
So what does Iraq get out of this? 10% or something like that?
Not much. So the production sharing agreements also lock in 30-year contract terms, and they give the foreign oil companies 70% of the profits.
70%. So Iraq gets 30,
right,
and the foreign oil companies get 70% of the profits. So if you can produce it at 1, and out comes $56 a barrel,
right,
that's 70% times 55, about $35, $40 a barrel pure profit.
Right.
And I don't know how many billions of barrels are used every year, but you're talking huge sums of money.
Huge sums of money, absolutely.
That all go to oil companies. Now, is this taxed at all? Do American taxpayers? I mean, it seems to me that we could tax 2/3 of it, and heck, we probably wouldn't have a budget deficit anymore.
U.S. oil companies don't pay taxes. None of the largest U.S. companies pay taxes. They get money back from the government every year. All of the largest corporations.
Based on the energy bill that was passed during the public administration?
No, based on the way our tax code has been rewritten.
What about the House bill that in the first 100 hours the Democrats passed to take away some of those tax breaks? Does that even the score a little bit, or hardly doesn't do much?
It's a very good move. It's very good for someone to finally take a stand against the companies instead of supporting them so wholeheartedly. And the fact that the money that is going to be retrieved from the companies is going to go to alternative fuels is also very good. But it's very much just the tip of the iceberg and doesn't address oil and the war at all. And just to be very clear about what we're talking about here, if this law is passed, okay, so here's the trajectory. Here's the trajectory for the occupation. The law has to be passed. U.S. companies, and of course, the Bush administration's interests are U.S. companies, have to sign the contracts. Then they have to get to work, but they need security to get to work. So what better security force is there in the world?
Troops. This way, taxpayers pay all the funds to help the oil companies get the money that they get to keep.
That's right. And of course, gaining access to Iraq's oil is not just about oil company profits, although of course it is also about that. It's about regional power, it's about global power, it's about denying that oil to other countries that would want it.
Now, but let me ask you this, because Paul Wolfowitz is certainly a neocon way at the beginning, Project New American Century. He's as much a part of this plan as any of the other 15 of them. He told us that at least our troops would be paid for. There is enough profit here. I mean, how much are we talking about? $1 trillion? I mean, more than that?
The amount is...
how much oil is being used in the United States annually? Do you have that figure?
How much we use annually? No, I don't know off the top of my head.
I know, but I mean, I'm sure it's hundreds of millions of barrels or billions of barrels times $40 in profit. 40 billion, maybe, I think it's actually more than that. It is enough to pay for our occupation of Iraq.
Sure.
But his plan, how are we supposed to get that money? Or is Wolfowitz being pushed out by the oil companies saying...
No. So there's a couple of things. So the first is, before the war, Iraq produced 2.5 million barrels of oil a day. Today it produces 2.3 million barrels of oil a day. It's producing plenty of oil. The Iraqis and the National Oil Company are producing that oil. That oil is being put back into the Iraqi government. It is paying for some of the reconstruction. It is paying to keep the Iraqi economy going. It's also going to a tremendous amount of graft because, again, this government is not a popularly supported government. It's also being wasted and abused. But also a lot of this money is going to U.S. companies that are exporting the oil out. So U.S. companies are exporting.
So they're making money on it now.
Oh, yeah.
But this oil law would give them a much greater share of the profits.
Right now, all they're doing is selling it. The oil law would give them ownership, not just ownership of the oil under the ground, but it allows them to control the flow of oil. So it would immediately put Iraq's position in OPEC in jeopardy because OPEC runs on countries being able to dictate supply.
Sure.
Now the foreign companies would now be in control of supply.
Well, now, all of this agenda, I mean, it's a naked imperialist agenda, but at the same time, it does make American oil companies richer. Why can't the president openly say, hey, we get tens of billions of dollars? Is it the American people won't support a war for oil? Is that their fear?
Wars for oil are illegal. There's only two reasons why you can launch a war. One is if you are directly being, your security is directly being threatened by another military. This is called literally the troops massing at the border. You need to defend yourself against an oncoming invasion. Two, if the United Nations Security Council says you can go to war. Nowhere is it written that you can go to war for economic objectives or oil objectives. Now let's put that aside. If the American public says we need the oil, we want our oil companies to get it, and we should be there. The answer to that is there are tremendous costs associated with fighting a war for oil. We are debating here, or maybe we're not, we in the American public are debating whether this is a war about oil. Nobody else in the world
The rest of the world knows it's a war about oil.
Exactly. The rest of the world knows it is and is waiting for us to acknowledge it and to do something about it. In the rest of the world, we, the Americans, are hated for this war. We will be hated considerably more if our oil companies are seen to directly benefit, of course, which they already are, but even more so from this war.
Can this law be stopped? I mean, the Iraqi parliament was elected. It's not clear sometimes how the elections work with the Shia and the Sunni and the Kurds. Would the Iraqi parliament possibly turn down this law?
They certainly could. And I talk in great depth in the Bush agenda about the election, what was wrong with the election, why the election wasn't considered by any of the most respected institutions that monitor elections as a legitimate election. But that aside, many of the Iraqi parliamentarians have been struggling to try and represent the Iraqi public, and they very well could resist the oil law. There is one thing that we can do that would dramatically facilitate their capacity to make a choice, and that is to end the occupation. The model of contract that's being presented in Iraq right now is that which is the industry's favorite. It's not used by any oil-rich country in the world.
So these aren't the agreements we have with Saudi Arabia or the agreements we have with, well, I don't know if we have any with Venezuela, but or Canada or Britain or anyone else.
No, production
Nigeria.
sharing agreements are only used in 12% of the world's oil reserves. The largest country that uses them right now is Russia, and they're desperately trying to get out of them. They were signed immediately, similar circumstances, immediately after the collapse of the Soviet Union, when the West was driving very hard for privatization, foreign corporate access into the Soviet Union, and demanding very, very, very good deals.
Now, why can't the Iraqi parliament do this? Why can't they sign the law while American troops are on the ground, give U.S. oil companies these huge profits for a year or two, and then when we withdraw troops, as everyone except the president seems to know is going to happen in a year or two, say, you know what, the 30-year terms, we're going to rip this up. I know it's a contract, but it was signed at a time when we had occupying forces. We're going to pass a new law and declare that old law invalid. And America would then be forced to say, we're going to go back in to protect our oil companies. It'd be naked oil aggression.
Yeah.
Isn't that something that they may well do?
It could certainly happen. That's one of the reasons, one, for doing this slower process, which is to try and make it legal, try and make it signed in, try and make it seem legitimate. And it's also a very good reason for maintaining the occupation if you want to see this process completed. But yes, a future Iraqi government could throw the whole thing out of the water.
Now, of course, we have Democratic oversight now in Congress. At least we have for about 3 weeks now. It's brand new, but it's there. Is there oversight in the Senate, in the House, over this oil law? Well, I mean, because for a lot of our listeners, this is the first they've heard of this. Will there be hearings on this?
There aren't right now, and that's something that we're definitely asking for. So I just participated in a day-long training session organized by United for Peace and Justice, which has brought, helped organize the march of however many want to say, at least hundreds of thousands of people in Washington, D.C., and about 1,000 of those people are then going to lobby tomorrow. They're members of Congress, and anyone can participate in this lobby day. And one of the things that I did was give a training session for people on how to talk about this oil law and U.S. contractors more broadly in Iraq.
Well, in the 4 minutes or so we have left, or 5 actually, let's train our listeners. If they want to say that we shouldn't be fighting a war over oil, if they want to say that, heck, the oil companies should be making these tens of billions of dollars while we taxpayers fund the war for them, what should they do? I can tell you this. The Capitol switchboard number is 202-224-3121. I used to work on the Hill. I know that number by heart. I'll repeat it. 202-224-3121. If you don't have a pen, it's easy to find. Go on the web. You can find it anywhere.
Yeah.
And the nice thing about that phone number is you can reach both your senators and your representative. Mm-hmm. You just have to know their names. In fact, even if you don't know their names, sometimes they help you out. Just say where you're from. You can get them. Okay, yeah. So they reach Congressman X, Senator Y. What should they tell him or her?
First of all, go in tomorrow. It's not very far.
It's true. For those of you in the local area,
go in. And if you don't, get them when they come home and go meet with your members of Congress and tell them, one, that the pressure being applied on the Iraqi government is only going to lead to significantly more war, significantly more killing. We have to end the U.S. pressure on the Iraqi government. We have to end the occupation. We have to start talking about oil and remove the curtain from that evil three-letter word and get our members to say it is absolutely not something that I support for our country to go to war to gain access to oil. Whether we need it or not, it doesn't mean we get to get it through war. And that they have to start talking about oil. They have to make clear that the only way to end this circumstance is to end the occupation, and it must happen right now. And our members need to hear from us on these issues.
Now, I mean, because there's lots of people who are opposed to the war in America, some 70% now. It looks like, with about 28% still supporting it. But the oil angle is not something that a lot of people focus on. They focus on the tremendous cost in lives, in wounded, in sheer dollars that's being used. What should they ask specifically about this oil law? I mean, for example, shouldn't there be hearings where the Democratic Congress can subpoena people and say, tell us about the oil law, tell us what happened behind closed doors, Dick Cheney, on your Energy Commission, tell us who's involved, who profits from it, how much money comes from it? I mean, shouldn't there be hearings on this kind of thing?
Absolutely. There should be hearings into what is the pressure, who's applying it, why are they applying it, what is the role of the oil companies. We know, for example, that U.S. oil companies were on the ground as advisors to the occupation government of Iraq, the U.S. occupation government, from the various first days of the occupation. They have been putting pressure on, we need to hear about this. We need to hear about what have the companies been after, what has the Bush administration been after, and how has this led us into war and kept us there now?
So who are our allies? I mean, let's see, the chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee is it Joe Biden now? No, who is?
That's a good question.
I have to check. But who are our allies in Congress? Are there some already that are on board to do this?
Not necessarily on oil yet. Allies who should be approached would be Waxman from California. We have Congresswoman Waters, Congresswoman Lee, Congresswoman Woolsey. Murtha should be approached. Byrd should be approached. Biden.
What's Nancy Pelosi said about any of this?
Nothing.
Nothing so far.
Yeah.
Why not?
Nancy Pelosi, in her position now as leader, is definitely playing a very safe role, what I would consider safe, coming from San Francisco. She's my representative. She needs to be forced into acknowledging what her constituents actually want, which is her to talk about oil and
because there's certainly, we have firebrands. We have people like Chuck Schumer, we have Barbara Boxer, we have people that are willing to take on this administration. Is it just a matter of scheduling that, they don't know what should go first, or is it a matter of will?
I don't know. They need to hear from us. Now is the time that they need to hear from us. I don't know what they would say about the oil law. It's time that they're asked.
It is time that they're asked, and it's time I'd like to see the oil company execs with their hand outraised testifying, just like Henry Waxman, who is one of my heroes, congressman from Los Angeles, had the tobacco executives up with their hand raised. I'd like to see the members of Cheney's Energy Commission. This is what we did, this is what we testified to, and if they're subpoenaed and they don't show up, there's always contempt of Congress. You can literally jail these people for not showing up and telling us the truth. So what's interesting is that we're not even asking the Democrats for any particular law. All we're saying is bring the truth out.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
All we're saying is hold hearings, put people under oath, and ask them tough questions.
That's right.
Which no one should be opposed to. It's one thing to say, well, I don't think we should deal with it this way, or maybe I like the profits, but I wish they come to taxpayers rather than oil companies. Wherever you feel on this issue, you got to know what the truth is.
Absolutely.
I mean, we still have callers, like, sorry, Kevin from Vienna, but people who think there was a connection between Saddam Hussein and Al-Qaeda. This kind of hearing before Congress would bring it all to the American people.
Absolutely.
Antonia, thank you very much for coming on the Inside Scoop.
Thank you.
If you want more information, you can buy her book, The Bush Agenda, Invading the World One Economy at a Time. I assume it's on Amazon and places like that.
Yeah, folks should go to their local bookstore, and you can also visit my website, www.thebushagenda.net.
That's it for the Inside Scoop. See you next week.